We have met today on this virtual platform to engage in a discussion on the book Making the Woman, Discourses of Gender in 18th-19th Century India. The book has been edited by Sutapa Dutta and Shivangini Tandon and published by Routledge UK in 2024. This book talk will be chaired and moderated by Professor Simi Malhotra. A warm welcome to you all. The Women's History Conclave, as you know, is an online platform we started in 2020 for engaging in different aspects of women's history. We try to work round the year by inviting historians and researchers to speak on our platform. We organize lectures, book talks, panel discussions, and even informal addas. A few weeks back, we held a discussion on Mallarika Roy's book, Feminist Frames, Gender Space and Violence in India, published by Zuban. We attach a lot of importance to these book discussions because we think it is our responsibility to familiarize our students and scholars with the latest researches in women's history. Now, a few words about the book that will be discussed today. Making the Woman examines the representation of women, their agency and subjectivity and gender relations in 18th and 19th century India. The chapters in the volume interrogate notions and discourses of women and gender during the period. They highlight the making of the woman across a wide spectrum of subject areas, regions, and roles, and attempt to understand the contradictions and differences in social experiences and identity formations of women. The volume also deals with prevalent notions of masculinity and femininity, normative and non-conformist expressions of gender and sexual identity. The book has 4 parts. The first part is titled The Private and the Public Worlds. The second part is titled Questioning the Normative. The third part is named The Problematic Others. And the fourth, Narratives of Femininity. The book consists of 12 articles authored by stalwarts in the field of gender history. Let me now introduce the editors of this book to the audience. Sutapa Dutta is a professor of English at Gargi College, University of Delhi. She will begin her Fulbright Fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania, US. She is also a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, London, and was a Fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, from 2018 to 2020. Her research interests and publications are focused on 18th and 19th century writings and cover gender, education, and identity in colonial India. She has published extensively. Some of her works are British Women Missionaries in Bengal, 1793-1861. This was published in 2017. Mapping India, Transitions and Transformations, 18th-19th Century, published in 2020. British Women Travelers, Empire and Beyond, 1770 to 1870. This was published in 2020. Disciplined Subjects, Schooling in Colonial Bengal, 2021. Her latest edited volume is titled Making the Woman, Discourses of Gender in 18th, 19th Century India. Now, some of my scholars have, those who are working on women's education, women's schooling, and the teaching profession in colonial Bengal, have read her works and cited her extensively in their PhD dissertations. Okay, Shivangini Tandon is an assistant professor in history at Women's College, Aligarh Muslim University. Her research interests include early modern South Asian history, feminist theory, and questions of language. She did her BA and MA from St. Stephen's College, PhD in history from Delhi University, and is a former visiting fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development, Germany. Dr. Tandon has been invited to many national, international forums as a speaker. Her articles have been published in edited books and journals like the Indian Historical Review, Journal of South Asian History and Culture, and by Nehru Memorial, New Delhi. She is the recipient of prestigious fellowships and awards like the Max Planck India Mobility Grant, Sanwa Bank Scholarship, and the ICHR Foreign Travel Grant. Now I request our co-convener, Dr. Bhashwati Chatterjee, to introduce Professor Simi Malhotra to the audience. Yeah. Over to you, Bhashwati. Yes.
Thank you, Aparna. Once again, a very warm welcome, you all, to Women's History Conclave. It's my privilege and honor to introduce our chairperson today is Professor Simi Malhotra. She is Professor, Department of English, Jamia, Milia, Islamia. Her areas of interest include literary theory and culture studies. Her publications include the co-authored books, Terrains of Consciousness, Multilogical Perspectives on Globalization, 2021, Ocean as Method, Thinking with the Maritime, 2022, the earlier one from Wurzburg University Press and the later Routledge, and the co-edited books, Food and Mediation and Inhabiting Cyberspace in India, Theory, Perspectives and Challenges, both from Springer 2021. And her most recent and co-edited books are Globalization and Sense-Making Practices, Phenomenologies and of the Global, Local and Glocal, and Globalization and Planetary Ethics, New Terrains of Consciousness, Effective World Making, Routing Planetary Thought, all from Routledge. And she is also the recipient of several grants and awards, and the latest being the UGC DAD PPP project. So welcome, Simi, and I now ask you to take the charge of these sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to both you, Bhashwati and to Aparna, for giving me an opportunity to be part of this Women's Conclave. And it's an added pleasure because I get to be a part of a book that I'm very, very fond of, which has been edited, of course, by two stalwart scholars and also such wonderful people. I'm really a big fan of both their scholarship and their work, and of course, them as people. So it's such a pleasure for me to get to be part of a discussion of their book. I must, of course, say that I'm one of the many who would have read the book, but I got a chance to read the book fairly early on. And I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to read this book and also to discuss this book with them. And so it's really a pleasure for me to be a part of this book. I must, of course, say that that it's a very, very significant and important book, not just for the for the ways in which, I mean, even in the foreword, Professor Farhad Hassan mentions, that it's bringing together a number of senior and young scholars together, and some of the essays that you have are extremely, extremely significant, not just in terms of the kind of corpus that they open before us and the archive that they bring, but also the arguments that they forward. And so it's really a storehouse, and a very, very rich storehouse for anybody who's interested in looking at discourses of gender in 18th and 19th century India. There are very many very important issues that this book raises about gender and modernity, of course, on the one hand, gender and genre, women's representation in literary cultures, what does that mean? And also, questions about language and many, many things. But I don't think I really want to speak before I give the platform really to Sutapa and to Shivangini to speak about the book. But I'm sure that the discussion that will follow after they've spoken will be something which will be really enriching for all of us. And so I'm really looking forward once again to listen to Sutapa and to Shivangini to speak about the book. So I'm going to not stand between you and Sutapa and Shivangini. And so I'm going to first invite Sutapa to briefly tell us a little bit about the making of this book, the making of the woman, but making of the book, and to tell us a little bit more about the argument of the book. So over to you, Sutapa.
Yes, thank you so much. Audible? Am I audible? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Yes, so first of all, very, very grateful to the Women's History Conclave, particularly Professor Aparna Bandyopadhyay, who invited us and gave us this platform to talk about our book. I'm very grateful to Professor Bhashwati Chatterjee for coordinating this for us today. And of course, very dear friend Simi Malhotra for agreeing to chair this. And it wouldn't be complete, as I told Shivangini, without Simi being a part of it. Okay, she knows the book, I think, more thoroughly than we do. Yes, she has at least read it many more times, and she has been very, very kind to have chaired a former talk that we did at another forum. Okay, Shivangini has been with me for a very long time. We've known each other for a very long time. In fact, this book emerged because of a society that we are a part of. And I'm not sure if all of you know here that we run a society called the Society, India International Society for 18th Century Studies. It's a India chapter of an international body on 18th century studies. And Shivangini and I are both a part of this. So I've known her for many years. And what we do every year as part of the society is that we have a major conference every year. So this book emerged out of a conference that was held in 2020 at Jamia, Milia, Islamia, and that is where Simi's role has been a major one. She's the one who facilitated this conference in her university, gave us the space for it, and gave us the opportunity to hold this. So this is where some of the this conference took place just before the COVID, just a month before COVID. And this is where some of the best minds and scholars and historians, as you can see, they came to give their papers. They contributed their papers. They were plenary speakers and keynote speakers, like Professor Tanika Sarkar was there, Kumkum Roy, Charu Gupta, Rajat Datta, and of course, Vijay Ramaswamy was also there. So I've known Vijay Ramaswamy ever since I was in IIS in Shimla, in the advanced studies in Shimla. I've known her there for 2 years, and before which she was also, many years back, she was also teaching in the college where I still teach now, Gargi College. Okay, so I've known her for some time, and she was very, keen to be a part of this conference, to be a part of this book, and she sat through with me with what sort of chapters and all that. But the reason probably why we have dedicated it to her is not because, of course, she unfortunately passed before she could see the book, right? She passed during the COVID time, and the book came out much later. Of course, by the time she had already given us the chapter. But the reason why I dedicate this book is because she is a peculiar type of a person, who was at the same time very brave, very outspoken, okay, someone who had extraordinary knowledge, of course, but it is mainly her bold interpretation of deviant women. Right, her book is called Deviant Women, and it is this very bold interpretation of deviant women, which she was very, very outspoken about, which actually faced a number of opposition, in fact, when she used to talk about them from certain, of course, political ideology. But despite all that, she was, I think she has made a mark on gender studies with this particular interpretation of women. So that's one of the reasons, Aparna, I think you were asking this, why we have dedicated this book to her. Right. And then, of course, from the conference papers, as you can see from the names of the contributors, a lot of them had presented their papers at the conference. We came up with this book. I would share the content, of course, the content page, so that all of you can take a look at the content. And I was actually very, very proud to say that, the thing is, it's a very multifarious sort of the topics, the content itself is something which covers almost the length and breadth of the country. Because if it is, we are talking about making the woman in the context of India, it is, of course, I would like to represent India as much as possible, as broadly as possible. So, of course, Shivangini will talk about the chapters a little later. So at that point, I'll share the chapter, the content page. What I would like right now is to say a little bit about why we actually talked about, why did we have such a collection of essays? What does it examine? What does it question? So, of course, it questions the notions and formations of women and gender binaries, which have historically shaped institutions and discourses in the 18th-19th century. We also know that the general tendency of history is to invisibilize women, to silence them, to ignore them. Okay? It has always been his story. But this is what we try to do. What we focus is, of course, in the origin of such interconnections, the contestations, okay, of how a woman in a position is conceptualized, both in the domestic and in the public life. So is there a static notion of womanhood, right, is what we are looking at. Is there a static woman of notionhood, of womanhood that society perpetuates? And are there obviously alternate pictures that debunk such an assumption? And if there are alternate pictures that debunk such an assumption of a static notion of womanhood, then it is up to us as women to portray that, to highlight those alternate pictures. So the current study, what we have done here, the volume, is to look at the constructedness of such categories that actually ignores so many multiple and diverse ways in which a woman or womanhood is constructed, or how a woman negotiates so many intersections of class, identity, gender, age, patriarchy, and so on. So, therefore, their volume intends to address this lacunae and focuses on the manifold issues of representation of women, their agency, their subjectivity, and the gender relation. Why we have chosen 18th, 19th century is, of course, this is what Bharat Hassan has also said in his foreword. I think he says that no other century, I guess, right, typically in South Asia, represents this shifting representation of women and gender so well. This was actually the changes which were happening. It can characterize the period as marking it as an early form of maybe South Asian modernity. So the changes which are happening is like, there are the emergences of new social classes, then there are professional middle classes, then there are reformations that is taking place. Then, of course, in the economic sphere also, so many changes are happening. At the same time, there are different norms and values and worldviews which are emerging in the 18th, 19th century because of course, contact with the colonial, rulers, with many other foreign invaders, okay, and influences. So these developments obviously are going to manifest themselves, okay, and we try to look into gender and gender relations and the shifting representations of such gender relation. So in this period, this is what the book wants to do. And what we are also questioning is, who is therefore a woman? Okay, who is a woman? Because we understand that it is not a fixed subject matter, that there are very many defining parameters of this, woman or womanhood. And there are various disciplinary formations which play a very critical role around gender. So very briefly, one can say that there is no golden nugget of womanness, right? Like, okay, that which all women have, right? That is not there. So as Judith Butler has said, that we should give up talking of woman as a type. And therefore, we have been alerted by Judith Butler or Stolzer or how what are the dangers of imagining women as monolithic or homogeneous, okay, or as a constituent that has only one stable meaning. So we have to understand the shifting nature of the definition of woman or womanhood. Okay. So, of course, and then what we question is what then makes a woman? Okay? Who is a woman, and then what makes a woman according to how is it some gender specific behavior, or is it some social or biological programming, right? What is it that makes a woman? Is it that society characterizes woman by a very nominal essence? Okay, and emphasizes a cluster concept, okay, in which certain members can just fit in. So a type is being created. Okay, and then further, what we do is I try to think about it's like are women the category of such constructed womanness the same? It is not, right? Is my womanness the same as yours? Because it obviously has many, the constitutive of being a woman is very, very different under different, maybe depending on the type of society. So, so what we understand from the chapters which Shivangini will go through very soon is that when we look into this history and we look into the 18th, 19th century, we understand that, a very highly selective and a desired notion of womanhood is sought to be universalized. And that, by definition, then becomes very, very exclusionary. Okay, it becomes the ideal womanhood, universalized womanhood. Okay, by definition itself, it is very exclusionary. And of course, in a way, it's also, one can say there is a hierarchy. It has hierarchy, it has power. So it's not a given constant. We have to constantly understand that we have to rethink how womanhood continues to be made, how it changes, and how it affects, at any point of time. So there are different combinations at different historical junctures, right? Which different social and ideological locations, and therefore we respond to this definition of womanhood in very, very different ways in different times. So the making of the woman, as we titled the book, is therefore an ever ongoing process. The making, that is why it's in the present continuous. The making of the woman is an ever ongoing process, an ever ongoing, I would say, a reconstructive process. Okay, that takes place on multiple complex levels. Okay, whether it be in space or time, or so it's not just 18th, 19th century. Of course, it has a palimpsest effect. Okay, it has been constructed and reconstructed over a period of time and space. So, and how what our contributors have done in this book is to see how there are several discursive layers of such cultural, social, economic, linguistic, class, gender, okay, how such different layers form such a reconstruction. Okay. So the various notions of womanhood, how have these been perpetualized? So I think the best person to talk about what these chapters are doing for us and how these chapters actually constitute this what we just talked about. Shivangini is the best person to talk about it. She will very briefly, I think, talk about these chapters which are there to give a fair idea of what we are doing in the book. Okay, thank you. And Simi, can I ask Shivangini to continue after this?
Thanks, Sutapa, for that overview. Yes. And I'm pretty sure that Shivangini will take us through the contents of the book through the chapter. So over to you, Shivangini.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Simi ma'am. So at the outset, let me thank Professor Bhashwati Chatterjee and Professor Bandyopadhyay, who are the coordinators of this fascinating Women's History Conclave, for having a book discussion around our book. So also I'm very grateful to Professor Simi Malhotra for taking time out as usual and being here as a chair with us. And both Professor Simi Malhotra and Professor Sutapa Dutta have been my guide, more as friends and also as mentors to me for a long time. And I really feel very lucky to have these two strong women in my life. So this book, Making the Woman, as has been said at the outset only, that it brings together 12 essays that look at discourses around the conception of women and gender in 18th-19th century India. This volume also unravels some of the historical processes that were fashioning and reshaping sort of new representations of women and gender binaries in this period. So in the beginning of the volume itself, as Professor Datta has also reiterated, that we've made it very clear that there is no universal category of woman and no common womanhood, but only its multiple sort of, these articulations of multiple womanhood. Therefore, the word making in our title refers to the fact that making of the woman is a perpetual or a continuous process. And so the book focuses on notions of womanhood that were created and constantly contested also and circulated in 18th-19th century India. A period when a particular brand of early modernity was also taking shape within South Asia. So now 18th century, as has been reiterated before, as we all know, is a very significant moment of transition in South Asian history. And so some of the changes Sutapa ma'am had already mentioned. So for instance, we find that there were new coming up of new communities of merchant and gentry. There were new spatial and social formations, especially like, for instance, the kasbas, the ganj. Also new spaces of communication and dialogue, like the bazaar, the spaces of the bazaar. So all these transitions that came about in the 18th century have generally been studied by more or less by historians like we have Professor Seemal, we have there was Professor C.A. Bailey, Sanjay Subramaniam, etc. But what has not been studied is how did these changes sort of impact the lives of women, and how did the women respond to these changes that we just talked about, which were taking place in mid-18th, beginning of the 19th century in South Asian history. Now, moving forward, the book also deals very well with the period of colonialism also, and the responses to it played a large role in reshaping the perceptions and formations of gender, body, domesticity, sexuality, and the household. Now, as we have clearly pointed out in the beginning of this work, that the debates of this period cannot be contained within the tradition versus modernity framework, as modernity in itself was intrinsically linked with colonial legacy. And the idea of modernity was also used by native reformers and thinkers. One example of this being the separation and the fashioning of the public and private domain separately by the Indian nationalists, which was seen as apt realms for men and women respectively. So for instance, I'm sure all of you must be aware of Partha Chatterjee's work. So Partha Chatterjee has seen this development as reflecting the desire of the upper and middle class men to retain some form of freedom and subjectivity in the inner realm of religion and faith, encompassed by home and family. So now the woman, the high caste, and the Hindu person thus represented as yet untouched, pristine, and uncolonized, private or the inner domain. Now, this new assertion of an ideal woman was thus part of a larger cultural critique of colonialism and the rapidly growing nationalist sensibilities, where women's bodies then become a site for expressing the supposed superiority of Indian culture and civilization. Now, also nationalist and reformist sort of entanglements with colonially mediated modernity thus recast women and gender forms in a new context. And this has also been dealt with in some of the chapters in the book. I'll just come to the chapters in a minute. Now, the nation in nationalist thought was now sort of imagined as an ideal Indian woman who was sacrificial and dutiful and who was to be defended and glorified. Women were considered the icons of nation, Indian culture, and the communities. And with this notion, patriarchies were thus simultaneously recasted in powerful ways. So some of the essays in this volume also talk about these patriarchies and how they were being questioned and subverted at the same time. In the book also, we've also talked at length about the pre-colonial period, to be specific, between the from the 16th to the 17th centuries, particularly to foreground the inadequacies of the public and private dichotomy, which is generally used by medieval historians or people who are working on these periods, mainly from the 16th to the 18th centuries, to study women and gender relations in the Mughal realm. This also reflects the epistemic presence of certain traditional histories of women written from within a rigid and simplistic conceptual framework, and show that how an overt reliance on unexamined categories in such researches often distort the histories and historical experiences of non-Western societies. So these kinds of simplistic conceptual understandings, unexamined categories, etc., they have also been contested and questioned by one or two chapters in the book. Now, specifically coming to the collection of essays in our volume, as was said in the very beginning, so the volume is divided into 4 sections, and it begins with 2 very, very interesting essays that examine the dichotomous models of public-private, which forms as a lens for historical analysis of gender relations and roles. So the first essay is by Shazia Malik, and as I can see, Shazia has joined us today also. So her chapter talks about these categorization, the colonial categorization of the female dancers, or the Hafizas of Kashmir, wherein she examines the changing colonial discourse about these female performers. While these Hafizas in question that Shazia talks about were associated with certain distinct regional art forms and Sufi poetical traditions, they were categorized as nautch girls and prostitutes in the writings of the European travelers and colonial officials. Now, the description of these Hafizas, both textual and pictorial, within colonial sources, focuses our attention on this kind of a nexus between gender, sexuality, race, and empire. It is a very valuable addition to existing research on the sexual politics of colonization. The second chapter in the first section is by Tara Sami Dutt, that seeks to redefine concepts of public and private by focusing on female performers who entered the Parikhana. Now, the Parikhana was an institution which was part of the larger harem of the last Nawab of Awadh, Wajid Ali Shah, to show how they used their skills and political acumen to rise to a status of power within the cosmopolitan but hierarchical Nawabi court and household. Now, these women that Tara has looked at, as seen through the folios contained in the text Ishaqnama, were seen to move seamlessly between both public and private spaces by using multiple identities, especially as both the Zanana or the harem and the Parikhana were seen to be state institutions. Now, the performances of Paris, or the young female dancers, performers, etc., can then be seen as political acts contextualized within the politics of a kingdom that was beleaguered by the last vestiges of Nawabi rule under the growing shadow of colonial control. The second section in our volume is titled Questioning the Normative, and it consists of 4 essays that seek to question the various social constructs surrounding gender, caste, class, the self, and the other. Now, the first chapter there is by Riya Gupta, who in her chapter on the Mughal Mirza studies conduct manuals of the 18th century, which particularly defined ideal masculinities and unmasculinities, therefore, for the Mughal service gentry and middling strata of officials at court. Now, based on an exposition of the discursive contrariness between men and women, these texts imagined, expressed, and even mocked manliness through the deployment of certain concepts, which were seen in complete opposition to what was seen as feminine and hence the other. So one can say that this usage of the category of the Mirza itself in the period of middle and late 18th century was being used to create a clear-cut distinction between the feminine and the masculine. Now, moving forward, Professor Charu Gupta's essay on Dalit women in 1857 provides the readers with a fascinating account of the female icons of Dalit Hindi literature and popular memory by exploring gender politics from the perspective of caste. Now, since these Dalit Viranganas or the women warriors, they were valorized as symbols of resistance against the colonial and the upper caste Hindu order. They were projected as moral, virtuous, chaste, and courageous like men. Their representation thus reproduced and further codified the dominant patriarchal order and its gender norms within Dalit memory and history. Now, I think that this essay is very crucial to the volume because it challenges the official and mainstream documented histories of the revolt of 1857. Also, at the same time, it widens its historiographical scope. Now we have an article on gender and tribal identity, another chapter in that section in Western India, gender and tribal identity in Western India, authored by Maya Unnithan Kumar, which draws a contrast between the self-representation of the Girehya tribe of southern Rajasthan and their classification by others as inferior tribals. Now, the gender relations within this community that Maya has looked at is the central basis in their depiction within accounts of the non-Gehyas, legitimized by modern sociologists and anthropologists. Then, in her essay on the changing depictions of the goddess Kali in the late 19th century in Bengali literature, Nilanjana Mukherjee, another contributor to the volume, presents the readers with interesting dynamics of the shift from depictions of the goddess from fierce to dispossessed and besieged. A goddess of clear tribal origins, her dark skin, scarred face, and primitive form was seen as a symbol of a nation in captivity, resonating with the racial and patriarchal imaginations of this period. Now, I find the third section of this volume particularly very interesting, and it is on the problematic others. This contains 3 chapters highlighting the othering or marginalization of certain social groups like the Tawaifs or the female public entertainers and eunuchs in India. Now, the first 2 chapters engage with the reimagination of the Tawaifs in the Awadh and Delhi regions in 18th-19th centuries, whereby one sees Tanya Burman exploring the material realities of female entertainers whose modern representations often oscillates between colonial nationalist condemnations of their immorality or then the glorification of their supposed freedom and subjectivity within the location of the kothas, which can be loosely translated as brothels. They've been done so, but I find this translation as highly problematic. But anyway, another chapter by Noble Srivastav examines the role of Tawaifs in Delhi's cultural landscape during a period of political instability. So one finds a lot of parallel in both the chapters. Now the third chapter by Lubna Irfan on eunuchs in Mughal India, or the Khwajasaras as they were called, explores the power eunuchs wielded within the Mughal household and court due to the nature of their gender identity that transcended the binaries of the Mughal elite culture. So on the one hand, their upward mobility also resulted in their demonization in the accounts of European travelers, and on the other, the mere presence of these Khwajasaras in the Mughal court culture, contested these binaries of feminine and masculine. Now, the last section of the volume, which is titled Narratives of Femininity, explores different narratives of femaleness within the material and ideological dynamics of colonialism and in the emergent reformist and nationalist ideas of 18th-19th century India. In one of the most significant essays in the volume, Vijaya Ramaswamy focuses on the women characters in the Tamil Mahabharatas, which emerge from the interactions between local oral traditions and Sanskrit textual versions. Now, these Mahabharatas contain protagonists that can be termed deviant females, as they often challenge and thwart the heroes of the more mainstream iteration, a point which was also mentioned by Professor Dutta in the beginning. But at the same time, these texts were hardly non-patriarchal, as they often reiterated the subordinate status of women made complacent within the narratives. Now, Meenakshi Malhotra again turns our attention to the liminal category of the girl child in 18th-19th century Bengal through a study of the Agumani songs, which were mainly the songs welcoming the goddess to the Navratri festival, mainly sung during Durga Puja. So here, Meenakshi Malhotra explores the contemporary conceptualizations of the collective female childhood, a category which is missing from print literature and culture. So this is what makes this chapter very significant to this volume. Now, in the last chapter, which is written by Nizara Hazarika, it examines the literary discourses of women writers from 19th century Assam, and in the writings about missionary women and later notions of domesticity among Assamese women themselves, the author posits a discussion of how gender and self-identity were being constructed without challenging patriarchal structures and their prescribed norms. Now, after summarizing all the chapters given in our volume, I just thought that, I would just spell out the main aim of our book. So the main aim of our book, as I would put it, is to highlight those aspects and debates on women and gender that were entangled with the socio-political and epistemological strands of pre-colonial period, also with colonialism, as well as with the reformist and nationalist ideologies, along with the material changes they brought with them. So in the last few decades, there have been several crucial books challenging stereotypes about Indian women, especially countering their alleged invisibility in the histories of both the pre-colonial and the colonial period. Now, this volume, we hope, is a welcome addition to the existing body of scholarship on the subject, refining our understanding of women's lives and roles in 18th and 19th centuries and the various constructions of womanhood and gender identities. The chapters in this volume aim to explore the diverse implications of contemporary developments on the positioning of women and men in what was a period of immense transformation. Now, while the tremendous impact of the Western or colonial hegemonic structure is acknowledged, without denying agency to Indian subjects, our chapters also undertake a robust discussion of marginalized gender categories as well. Though we are aware that our book is not meant to be completely inclusive in its attempt to understand the making of a woman, but it does successfully unravels many complex interfaces between colonialism, nation, culture, and gender. And I really hope that people who've gotten a hold of our book, or after this discussion would like to have a look at the book. So I really think that people from different disciplines would find something useful in all the chapters that are there in this volume. Thank you so much.
Thanks such a lot, Shivangini. I think that was so required and necessary in terms of the audience actually getting a sense of the book, because I'm sure with the kind of overview that you've given of the chapters and the arguments and the structure of the book, now people would have got a larger and a greater sense of what this book is all about. So thank you so much for taking us through that argument. I think it's very important, and I'm pretty sure that just like I and my researchers thereafter have often refer to your work as something which is very, very important for the researchers that they themselves and I myself, engage with. I'm pretty sure that the audience here, which largely comprises of historians, would certainly engage with this book also. But before we turn to them and we ask them probably, that what questions they might possibly have for you or any comments that they might have, I just thought that I will invite maybe you and Sutapa to probably say a little bit more about, you were absolutely right, in the sense that how you begin your introduction, and of course also in terms of, let's say the general revisionist historiography and the ways in which one approaches the question of colonial modernity, and of course also from the question of gender. And absolutely right, and I think Professor Farhat Hassan also mentions that with this rise of new social class, there are new mentalities which are produced. But I think one of the things which is very, very significant about this book, and which, which is really something which makes this book unique from the other kind of revisionist historiography which exists, is the kind of importance that it lays to the distribution of emotions and affects which are produced. And I think that is a very, very important turn in this kind of a historiographic account that we have of the 18th and 19th century. And of course, there are many, many historians now who do look at affect and emotions. But I think your book, in some ways, especially where it goes on to map, many categories of household, of domesticity, of gender, of emotions and affects, I think also speaks a lot about this kind of a new mentality, which is also probably not mentality, but a new sensibility. I mean, one will have to think of an appropriate term. But I think somewhere Professor Farhat also makes a distinction between akal and nafas. I mean, the idea of reason and desire. And I think in some ways this new kind of an articulation is really unique about your book. So I don't know if Sutapa or you, Shivangini, would like to speak a little bit about that, because I think this book takes the argument of revisionist historiography beyond some of the existing arguments which already exist in the field in terms of making certain categories more accessible to the readers. So I don't know if you would guys like to say something about that, Shivangini.
Yeah, before we actually answer that, Simi, can we also request, there are two contributors here, Sajia is here and Meenakshi is here, Meenakshi Malhotra. Is it okay if we can give them 5 minutes to talk about their chapter? Because I'm sure they'll be able to talk about the chapter much better than we have been able to do, and they have been very kind to join today. Can we just ask them, please?
Absolutely. I would really invite Shazia and Meenakshi to speak. So Meenakshi, first you and then maybe Shazia. So please do tell us a little bit more about your...
Hi, can you see me? I mean, yeah.
Yes.
So my interest is basically in 19th century Bengali women's autobiographies. So, 18th and 19th century. And also, one of the things that you realize when you think of the notion of the child, when we historicize the notion of the child, Chelebala in Bengal is always invariably the male child. It is the various dialectics that Shivaji Bandyopadhyay, Nivedita Sen and others have talked about. So then I said, where is the female child? And then you realize that she slips through a lot of, when girls were married off at 8 and 9, where was childhood then? And then I've looked at, and I think there is a kind of precedent for this kind of work, but I looked at particularly Agumuni songs because I thought that this was an area which can be actually explored, not just sociologically in terms of affects, but also from the lens of psychoanalysis, as it were. So I've talked about the whole sort of burgeoning subjectivity of women and the whole notion of who's a woman through the lens of this particular relationship of the mother and daughter, which gets mapped in the Agumuni songs, because this is something unacknowledged and not rendered legitimate within the structure of existing patriarchies. You have a lot of Tagore stories where young girls are widowed and their older fathers are getting married and things like that. So you have this whole realm of emotion, of subjectivities that are completely silenced, marginalized, invisibilized. So this was my area of interest. And luckily I found I did a bit of translating myself. I'm a Bengali, so, of the Agumuni songs, because I come from a background where we used to have Durga Puja in our family home. So,
That's great.
Something that is part of my cultural imagination.
If you have the book, you could even read it out, Meenakshi, because why I'm so glad you joined is because this is predominantly a Bengali audience, right? And in fact, Aparna said, can you talk in Bangla?
And Sutapa, I don't know whether I was a part of the conference, but this was something I was working on for the Indian.
You were not a part of the conference. I requested you to give this separately, a chapter separately, because I thought this was going to be very, very useful.
I had submitted it, and then they said that we have a backlog and you have to work on this and that. And then finally I gave it in for you, because I was also putting my journal articles together for my application for professorship and so on, but a little late in the day. But anyway, so but I finally enjoyed this, and the fact that I looked at a lot of YouTube clips and so on. So I'm sure there are people in the audience who know more, and they also know about the Vijaya songs. So I was focusing particularly on the Agumoni as things which there is a kind of sentiment, there's a kind of helpless anger that if Shiv is both the father of Uma and the husband and father are completely impervious and insensitive to the emotions that the women are going through. So you have a sort of something that is so, and again the whole idea of informal forms where the self is being mapped. So I can just read the abstract, but I think so the chapter seeks to inquire about a significant gap and absence in 18th century Indian history, which is the history or her story of the missing girl child. Any attempt to locate the girl child in early Bangla literature stumbles upon a gap and an absence. This is particularly so since women's voices prior to their expression in print culture had to be through the conduit of the oral. That this we know, and Shumanta Banerjee has later this thesis of how this is also pushed out of sort of respectable Bangla culture. So the oral is also the repository of women's songs, which in pre-modern culture was one of the few conduits for expressing grief and loss, although there were songs of celebration as well. So this discusses songs which it speculates, the Agumoni songs, could be viewed as an epistemological pathway to think about the affective, expressing feelings and emotions that were silenced and delegitimized in an overwhelming patriarchal environment. Yeah. So, of course, everybody here would know that the Agumoni songs describe the return of Parvati or Durga to her home in rural Bengal, not as goddess, but as daughter, and are followed by Vijaya songs, which describe the sorrow of separation 3 days later as she returns. So that whole space of, and even in Punjab, I think you have these sort of wedding songs. So I was looking at Agumoni in that realm of, as producing and expressing affects which do not get written or discussed about. But of course, now in the last 20-25 years, I think that has begun to change. Yeah. And there is very interesting work on the girl child happening in Bengal as well. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to read out a couple of lines from what Meenakshi has translated for this, one of the songs, which I found was very, very relevant to what she's right now saying, is a song which is Ebar Amar Uma Ele Ar Pathabo Na. When Uma comes again home, I will not send her back. This is a mother who is singing this song, and she said, this is a translation. When my Uma returns, this time when my Uma comes, I will not send her back. If people call me bad, that is a bad mother, let them. I will not listen to anyone. This time when my Uma returns, I will not send her back. If the conqueror of death comes to talk of taking Uma back, if Mrityunjay comes to talk of taking her back, we mother and daughter together will quarrel with him. I will not agree because he is my son-in-law. This time when my Uma returns, I will not send her back. Okay, so I think the affect or the emotion of a mother-daughter, this is what very clearly defines, the child, the girl child, and what is her role in society then, yes. Or a married woman's role in a society once she leaves her home. Okay, thank you so much, Meenakshi. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Meenakshi. Yeah, Shubha, it would be nice had you read it in Bangla. Bangla porle aro bhalo hoto.
Amar Meenakshi porte pare. If Meenakshi has the words, I have the translation.
Yeah.
I
have the translation. Ebar amar Uma ele, and then I'll also have to look at the YouTube thing because I don't have it here in the book. I have it somewhere. But all of them, I mean, this thing, Jao Jao Giri, even there, she's talking about Anite Gauri Umanaki Boro Kedeche. And then she says that he is constantly on hashish and bhang and, basically...
complaining about her husband, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So should we now invite Shazia to speak a little bit about her work? Shazia?
Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Is it okay if I keep my camera
as you feel comfortable? Yeah.
Sure.
So thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of today's discussion, and I'm honored to have contributed a chapter. And I sincerely thank the editors Sutapa and Shivangini for their vision and commitment to recovering the women's voices across time and space. But before I delve into the discussion, I would like to begin with a small disclaimer. I'm not a trained historian in the formal sense, but my engagement with history has been deeply shaped by my privilege of working alongside learned historians like Professor Farad Hassan and Shireen Musli. Their guidance has helped me to look at the history in a deeper way. So this chapter is about the Hafizas, and these are the female dancers and women singers who were once respected artists, but they were later labeled as something immoral under the colonial rules. And what I have tried to bring in this chapter is their real history, back into the light. That would be free from the biases that erase their contributions. And I hope that, this discussion helps us to see their story in any way, because I don't see it as an academic intervention, but as a political act of decolonizing Kashmir's gendered past. And when I wrote this chapter, I remember when Shivangini approached me for this, I was working on a project for, a female, both cis and trans females, singers, women singers who were on YouTube channels. And looking at the hate that was pouring in for them on the digital, sites. So I wanted to understand the background of that hate, and also in the chapter I have mentioned few female singers who whose lives got endangered because of the hate that is there for the female performers in any way, like whether they are simple singers or dancers in today's Kashmir. It's very tricky to do such things now. So I wanted to go into the background of that, and it is in, with that perception that I wrote this chapter.
Thank you so much, Shazia. Thanks a lot for sharing. That's such a wonderful chapter. I've read it, and really fascinating work. So, Shutapa, Shivangini, I don't know if you guys remember the question which I had asked at the beginning, which is about, revisionist historiography, which takes on this whole, new kind of mentalities of emotions, affects, and sensibilities, and new kinds of brings absolutely new kinds of methods to the analysis. So would you like to speak a little bit about that? Any of you?
Yeah. Can I start?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Please.
Okay. So since I was a part of this fellowship, Max Planck, and the center that I was associated with was the Center for the History of Emotions. So I am very glad and very thankful, Simi ma'am, that you asked this question, and somehow both of us forgot to talk about it. But you are very right. So if one looks at the historical trajectory of bringing in affect and emotions, so it has been a long journey. So for instance, let me just begin with the two words that you mentioned, I think, which Farad sir mentions. So one is the lower self or nafs or the baser instincts vis-a-vis rationality or akl. Since the beginning, I think these two distinctive categories have been used very cleverly by male chauvinist, scholars to create this kind of a distinction between the female as being, someone who was whose life was dictated by these baser instincts. And I'll just talk about how this concept of nafs has been translated also. So,
yeah, I think the Western theorists have also spoken about the mind and the body, right? That particular distinction, exactly. Huh.
So these constant binaries of the man being the rational one and the woman being the irrational one. While the man is more practical, whereas the woman is very sensitive. She is very emotional, giving into temptations and things like that. So we have in various cultures we have these kinds of binaries that are there. So if one looks at the South Asian historiography, so it was, I think, around late 16th, beginning of the 17th century with the works like those of Rosalind O'Hanlon and Rubilal. But they don't emphasize on this aspect of emotions and affect very explicitly, though they do talk about the importance of the household, the importance of conjugal relations, the importance of marital alliances in constructing or systematizing the political negotiations that were going on in the court circles of the 17th and the 18th century. But I think it is with the later works, like, so we have history of emotions, we have experts in that field, like we have Margaret Purnell, we have Ute Forward, we have William Reddy, and there are many other names that are not coming to my mind right now. So I think so speaking from a personal experience, if one uses this aspect of emotions and affect, so first thing is that it helps one to, deconstruct these stereotypical frameworks of looking at the significance of woman and womanhood and the various roles that they were playing. So for instance, history or for that matter, any other discipline remains male-centric, because all these kinds of feelings, for instance, friendship, endearment, loyalty, these are seen as or longing, for instance. So these are seen to be part of the lower self or the baser instincts, which are generally associated with women. But with the help of the history of emotions, if one tries to relate the concepts of history of emotions to these various disciplines, whether it's history, whether it's English, whether it's sociology, one can very well, look at how these very emotions were playing very significant roles in political negotiations, socio-economic processes of the period and things like that. And while looking at that, then one tends to give more importance to aspects like feasts and festivities, for example, marital relations, the aspects of conjugal intimacy. So I think that is one very important aspect, and it is through these kinds of history of emotions, the concepts of affect and all that, that the histories of women have been strengthened, and one has successfully been able to bring these histories to the forefront, because now one is not just looking at how many wars, for instance, the king won and how chivalrous was the king, but we are also looking at how was he a father, for instance, within the domestic domain, how was he behaving, how was his relationships with his wives, with his daughters, with his sisters, so we are looking at a sensitive man. So if one can use the term, the cultural turn, for example, so if we can use that, then we can see that, it is because of this affect and emotions being used in this, being being used in this socio-cultural processes, that one has been very successfully able to see women as, mainstream subjects of history.
I'm so glad, Shivangini, that you spoke about this, because I think what the book does, I mean, of course, you do ask that question, and both you and Sutapa in the introduction itself mentioned that, is woman an ontological category? And of course, we go on to see through the book, as an epistemological and ethical, a political, kind of a category. But I think what is very significant, and, maybe partly I'm also influenced by your other writing, Shivangini, but, the emphasis, as you rightly said, on the domestic or the household or the companionate marriage and, intimate relations, etc., etc. The question of affect and emotion certainly does get mobilized. But I think what I really found very, very interesting in some of the works which are there, I mean, because there are those kind of works which also exist in the book, which also do see the domestic, and of course, the idea of the public and private has been sufficiently problematized, when it comes to studying colonial modernity. But but what I found very interesting was that apart from seeing the domestic sphere or the household as a political unit, as a unit which is also a political unit in itself, and so therefore recasting probably that unit. But I think what I found more interesting was the fact that how there's a mobilization of emotions and affects which are not really, which don't comfortably sit with the received categories of modernity in some senses, which is where I think this book really breaks, many, many new grounds in terms of the methods that it offers, in terms of the archives, therefore, that it opens, in terms of, let's say the ways in which it allows us to look at some of the sources that we have. So really fantastic about that. And I'll just ask my last question, because I think I should not really hog the space just by virtue of being the chairperson. But I'm really asking this question because I'm sure there are others who would also probably, like to listen to what you have to say. The other question, which also I think is very striking, is that when one looks at women's representation through different kinds of genres, we heard Meenakshi speak about the Agumani songs, or, we've so many other kinds of accounts that we have of conduct books and many different kinds of genres and, self-writing, or, I was just wondering that, in some ways, a lot of these genres are also, they also mimic certain Western, kind of categories or models or genres which exist. And of course, you also look at very carefully, and I must congratulate you for that, not just the idea of gender and genre, but also gender and language, and so I was just wondering that, within the sphere of representation, there's of course something which is outside representation. We know representation has its biases, so even the accounts that we have are what we have. But I was just wondering that from the accounts of representations that we have in terms of genre or language, if you'd like to look at this, this coming together of gender and how it problematizes some of these categories very, very differently from kind of received, genres that we have. I was just wondering if you'd like to reflect.
Yes, if I could just say that, because that's again one thing which I would have loved to work a little more, in our book. But there is something I just very briefly touched upon that, but couldn't actually develop it much. And this various genres of representation that you're talking of, which particularly one can see, of course, during colonialism, and with social reforms coming in, especially for women's issue, where women's issues became major sites of reformation in many ways. So what were the roles, right? Whether they were looked into as women who were socially useful, or whether they were useful as mothers or wives, or whether they were now seen as contributors to nation building. So there were new roles and responsibilities that, of course, women's education was giving to them, and their position in society had to be in a way reformed or improved. So this, the emergence, of course, of narratives of social reform was insisting on representing Indian women as, of course, as victims of patriarchal domination that required, therefore, the intervention of the colonial state. So, on one hand, there was the portrayal of Indian women as victims of patriarchy, and therefore requiring the intervention of the colonial state. At the same time, these new women, because of the space that was being given and the autonomy that was given to women, these new women were perceived to have forgotten their tradition and their feminine roles. And they were then seen as a threat to the values and culture of society. Okay, so the tradition versus the modernity bit of it, the tussle there. And one of the genres that I would have loved to have seen it, but of course I've done it in some other place in my another book and article, is where how they're lampooned, such women, emancipated women, are lampooned and criticized. So I've looked in another journal article, in South Asia Journal, where I've looked at Punch, and the satirical English satirical magazine, which ridiculed this modern woman. Okay, and how there is one, I'm just very briefly I'm talking about it, how there is one particular cartoon there where there is a fashionably dressed housewife who is seen sitting at a chair, on a chair and a table in front of her. Well, the chair and the table itself is a colonial, setup there, which is to show that she's very fashionably dressed and she's depicted reading a novel. While in the next room, one can see through the door, a husband is stoking the kitchen fire. Okay, so there is her agency, and what she turns towards the husband, and she tells him, "Shut the door. The smoke is getting into my eye." Okay, so she tells him, "Stoke the fire, kitchen fire, but shut the door because the smoke is getting into my fire, into my eye." So there is, of course, agency. There is a self-identity. There is power. Whereas the male body is seen as marked by subjection to foreign domination, to urbanization, to remaking. Okay, in a very different way, and so. The newly educated woman is perceived to be a threat now because she has forgotten her traditional and very feminine roles. Okay, so this is a critique of the making of the woman. Okay, how the woman is being fashioned in this particular way. Is she to be imagined as a custodian of cultural purity, a woman who has to be in the an angel in the house, right? Or is she now a more empowered woman who can actually defy patriarchy and patriarchal norms? So Punch, the English satirical magazine, was one of the genres that actually lampooned this. Okay, yes. So, thank you.
Thanks so much, Sutapa. You're absolutely right. And I think in some ways the archive that you presented in that book kind of extends the idea of the archive also to include so many different kinds of registers that probably would not have become part of, from performative to ritualistic to songs to all kinds of discourses. But I think now we should really open the floor to other people to ask questions. So I don't know if Bhaswati and Aparna want to go first, or if there are others who'd like to. So
Yes, you can raise your hand and ask questions. So, Bhaswati, do you want to start by asking a question?
Not any question. I just have, Maria, exactly not a question. When you are talking about 18th and 19th century together, every time. So I just wondering whether there was a transition from 18th to 19th. And through these essays, how have you just taken in notice of these transitions from the 18th to the 19th? The women question, we already knew it rose during the 19th century, but you are talking about 18th century, and you have very justly explain that also, how you have treated that question. So I was just wondering how this transition happened from 18th to 19th.
No, that's exactly what the book is trying to present. That these changes do not just occurred in a particular time in the 19th century. Okay, given our understanding of women's emancipation and reformation and education, we tend to think that the making of the woman has happened only with the colonials coming in there, right? What we're trying to show is, of course, how were women positioned in the harems, how were they positioned in the zanana, how were they positioned in say, as our book has shown, okay, in the kothas, okay, or as the wives are there, or the eunuchs are presented, how were they presented there in the 18th century, or even as mother figures? Okay, what was the role of a mother in the 18th century? I'm not talking specifically of Islamic households or Mughal households. No, it is typically in that before pre-colonial. I'm talking of pre-colonial period, to see how was womanhood was being constructed pre-colonial period, and then to see what's happening in the colonial period. And that is you could call it a transition or transformation or similarity, differences, whatever. How has it changed? Has it remained static? Has it, what has happened? So that is why it is very important to go from the 18th to the 19th. Yes.
Yes. I have a small question. Actually, yes, I was thinking in, Bhashodi's lines also, because the 18th century in history is considered a dark century. This was a period when the Mughal Empire crumbled and these regional kingdoms emerged, and then there was this onset of colonialism, and Bengal was the bridgehead. It was, the colonial power. Our colonial rulers first set their foot in Bengal, and Bengal witnessed this transition from the pre-colonial to colonial. It was a pioneer in this process of transition, and how Western education transformed the whole idea of womanhood and all. So yes, I was trying to identify the continuities between the 18th and 19th century, and also the breaks and discontinuities. And as far as my understanding goes, in the first place, there was this the whole idea of the man-woman binary. This was not there in the pre-colonial era. There was a lot of fluidity in gender identity. There were people with diverse sexual orientations, and they were all accepted in society. But this binary, I think that was a product of colonialism. The British enforced this binary, and they enforced heteronormativity. So that was one the change that I myself have, I think, have identified. There was another thing. There are several articles on tawaifs and courtesans, and these courtesans and tawaifs, they were there in the 19th century, but they were all clubbed together under the blanket category of prostitutes. They were all reduced to prostitutes, and prostitution was considered something immoral, something bad, and also, of course, and with health risks as well. So these are two things. And with regard to affect and emotions, the other change that I find, historians have pointed out that there was the whole idea of companionate marriage, of romantic love within conjugality that came with exposure to Western education. But I have questioned these notions of romantic love and companionate conjugality in my own writings, and also the idea that women internalize this so-called resolution of the women's question that Partho Chatterjee has talked about, and women, did not internalize. Women did not actually, they did not actually, all women did not try to, adhere to these the norms upheld by a nationalist patriarchy. Women transgress these norms and defied these norms. So since I've worked on women's emotions and on love, precisely, desire and defiance, that is the theme of my own PhD dissertation, and also the book that was published subsequently. I've tried to identify the emotional world, the trace, the map, the emotional world of women, and also I'm curious to know how what were the continuities in this respect. Now, what I have found is that previously women's desires were considered base. I mean, the words used for babichar and pap. Now, since the late 19th century, women who were in love outside marriage, widows or married women who loved, who were engaged in extramarital relationships, or widows who loved men other than their husbands, they were they were considered sinful. I mean, their love was considered sinful, but the word that was used, nevertheless, in the critiques of such, in the criticism and the backlash against such depictions of relationships in novels, was love, prem. Prem was the word that was used, while initially it was pa, babichar and all. So this book really has given me a lot of fodder for thought, and it has triggered a lot of questions in me, and I think I am personally immensely enriched by the discussion that has taken place this evening. I mean, the snippets of the chapters that you upheld before us, put forward before us. So, but I would like, like to hear from any of you how actually these courtesans and the wives transitioned into prostitutes in the 19th century. Has anybody dealt with this aspect in any of the chapters that your book includes? The transition from courtesan to prostitute.
No, I think Shivangini, you can take that up. But before just one little thing, Aparna, just I wanted to clarify it, is that what our book actually tries to do is exactly break this sort of idea that during the pre-colonial period, gender stereotypes didn't exist, or gender binaries didn't exist. Okay, in a way, it probably existed then too, in many ways, which we are being shown or tutored in a particular way to think that it only existed after colonial thing. Because one of the books that one of the chapters, chapter 3, if you look into that, the politics of becoming a Mirza, here Riya Gupta looks at a very at a manual. It was an advice manual called Mirza Nama, which clearly defined, and this is what a Mirza should be like. That means who is a gentleman or who is a man. Okay. So Mirza is so it is defining masculine ideals in the Mughal imperial court. And so and so, if he behaves like so and so, is a Mirza, is a gentleman, is a man. So obviously it is, and therefore not effeminate. Right, and therefore not someone who can be categorized as feminine. Okay, so therefore the categorization of feminine, masculine does exist. Okay, and these books are advising men to be masculine in a particular. So these are advice manuals, which they are actually being written and read.
But did the pre-colonial, the pre-colonial moral universe, so to say, uphold heterosexuality as the norm? We've heard of rulers, kings who had been homosexual. And women within the harem must have had lesbian relationships. But what about, the norm? Was heteronormativity the thing?
Accepted or not? That's what you're saying. Was it accepted?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Shivangini, would you like to say? You've talked about.
So I think certain issues, when they are looked at by people of literature, they look at it from a completely different perspective vis-a-vis the historians. So I would, for instance, have a problem in you calling the 18th century a dark age. Well, it has been, for a very long time, this has been contested by various revisionist scholars like Professor Farad Yeah, Sanjay Subramaniam.
Yes, I teach history, but yeah, some scholars had called it a dark century, and of course, I mean, there's been a lot of revisionist writing on that. Yeah, but yes, but I mean, I know that. I mean, I am aware of the debate and I teach the debate, but initially it was called a dark century, and but then others have contested it, right?
Yes. So
anyway.
Yes, the other thing that you were talking about, that whether heteronormativity was a norm in the literature of the pre-colonial period, I think I would just like to return to what Professor Simi Malhotra had just asked both of us, which is this the interrelationship between genre, language and representation, because in during the pre-colonial period, all these things are very, very significant. So for instance, you find multiple genres in the pre-colonial period, right? So you have the Tariq literature, the court chronicles, you have the Tazkiras or the biographies, you have the Malfuzat literature, right? So all these kinds of things. But I think that, you know, if you want to, and then you have a separate genre on the didactic or the normative texts, which are referred to as the adab or the akhlaq texts. So if you want to look at certain norms of the period, certain normative formulations of the period, then you will have to move across genres. So say, for instance, if you look at the court literature or the tariq, just to give you one example, so if you contrast the Tazkira literature, which is the biographical, the Persian biographical narratives, with the Tariq literature or the court chronicles, you will get a very different understanding of the kind of relationship that existed between Jahangir and Noor Jahan, for instance. Now we all know that, you know, Jahangir was very, very fond of Noor Jahan. I'm just giving you an example. You know, so he was very, very fond of Noor Jahan, but and he was deeply in love with her so much so that he kills her first husband, Sher Afghan, right? But if you look at Tuzuk-e-Jahangiri, you will not find any such reference there, right? But if you look at the 17th and the 18th century Tazkira literature, whether you look at Masirul Umrah or you look at Zakiratul Khawanin, you will not only get a hint of it, but in fact, Masirul Umrah, written in the 18th century, talks at length about the love story. And in fact, I think that the text also constructs that kind of a narrative that, you know, when he first saw Noor Jahan during Nowroz, you know, he lost his heart and things like that. So it's full of that. So it's you know, it's quite problematic to say for sure that whether heteronormativity was a norm at that time, because if you look at texts like Aine Akbari or the Akbarnama, Abul Fazl very clearly states there that the purpose of marriage is the production of offspring, right? So if you look at that, then again you can say that heteronormativity was a norm. But again, if you look at other genres that were prevalent in the pre-colonial times, you might not find. For example, in one of the Tazkiras, which is Zakiratul Khawanin, which was written in the 17th century, in that the words used for feminine and masculine beauty, the Persian words, they are more or less similar. So, you know, for instance, in English, right now, you will not call a boy pretty, or for that matter, you will not call a girl handsome, right? But these kinds of binaries, the linguistic usages, you know, they were very fluid, as you rightly pointed out, you know, in the beginning only. So I think, you know, it depends on genres, and the kind of genres that one is looking at in the pre-colonial period varies according to the linguistic construction that is there within it, and also therefore it affects the kind of normative representations that we have in final form. So with regard to the pre-colonial period, that is one point that I wanted to make. So I don't have a lot of idea on tawaifs, but I did write a paper on one of the tawaifs of Awadh. So in that, the literature that I was dealing with, and I think that I was, just let me, yeah. So Tanya Burman's paper, so she looks at, if you look at the meaning of the word tawaif or the origin of the word tawaif, so you have, Taif meaning circumambulator, Taifa meaning a troupe or company of dancing girls, Tawaf meaning bands of itinerant musicians, and Tawaf referring to frequent visits on circumambulation, etc., etc. And they were representations. They were mistresses of Tehzeeb, Tamiz, Ada, Nakra, Akhlaq. And if you look at the vernacular literary tradition, so these terms were very different from the kinds of terms which were used for prostitutes. So you see that very early there was a distinction made. So for example, for the prostitutes specifically in the vernacular indigenous language, we have Vaishyas, Khanjari, Randi. So these were used to denote women who were either chiefly provided sexual services or did so openly and were thus graded the lowest. I think it was in the 19th century, why suddenly these tawaifs, which earlier represented akhlaq, adab, tamiz and all that, and we all know that the Nawabi, the children from the Nawabi families used to be sent to the kothas of these tawaifs to learn tamiz, tamaddum, akhlaq and things like that. I think their degeneration started with the problematic colonial categorization of these, these linguistic terminologies. Because in Europe or in the West, you did not have an equivalent to these tawaifs, for example. So I think that's why they started referring to the tawaifs as prostitutes, because in English, you did not have any other word. And also many of the colonial records, if you see of the 19th and the 20th century, if I'm not mistaken, many of these British officers, they also married these tawaifs. They had sexual relations with them. They also produced offsprings. And then they left them when, of course, we got our independence. And then they left and went back to Britain. So I think from that also they got an idea that, they were just there for their to serve them or for their own sexual pleasure. Because I think they just did not have any equivalent to tawaifs or that kind of a tawaif culture in the West. So this is what I think. I might be wrong.
Fantastic, Shivangini.
Can I just have, Shivangini, to sort of dare tread on his, your territory of colonial history, that Shumanta Banerjee also talks about this, where he says there's a range of terms for the Bengali, khaki, this is a lot of terms, but which then gets reduced and codified. Also because of the whole public health thing that British government raises, 1867, I think they bring in that.
The Contagious Diseases Act. Yes.
Contagious disease, that's right.
Right. The Shumanta Banerjee, the dangerous outcast. And there's a Bengali version also of that book, Ostruta Kontosha, right? Yes, I would love to hear more from you. Okay.
No, I don't know something of the range of terms available in the Indian language, which is very nuanced, gets lost in translation, therefore, when you have this generalized term of a prostitute.
Prostitute, right.
I think Shazia wants to come in.
Shazia, yes.
Shazia, you've raised your hand. I'm assuming you want to say something, huh?
Yeah, I started speaking without opening my mic. So I wanted to add one small point in this discussion, that we often assume that rigid gender norms and heterosexual frameworks have always been the standard, in the earlier history. We in Kashmir, there's a richly recorded history in the form of Raj Tarangani, and this matter, gender, sexuality, and heteronormativity is definitely an unexplored area. But then there is no criminalization as such. So I think it is, with the onset of colonial rule, that there are certain moral and legal frameworks that are generated in this era that criminalize certain forms of sexuality, and heteronormativity becomes more compulsory in that sense. So that's what I wanted to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
According to the Criminal Tribes Act, I think the eunuchs were they were considered criminals. Yeah. Criminalized. When homosexuality was criminalized and eunuchs were labeled criminals. Right. So this thing was not there in the pre-colonial period. But again, the pre-colonial period was not an homogeneous, monolithic period. I mean, there were lots of regional variations and lots of, there were different layers, of understanding of gender relations, of sexuality. I mean, elite literature and also subaltern literature would depict these relations in different ways, I think. So in Bengal, we have in colonial period, we had a strand of Bottola literature, which we would consider a low literature. Okay. So, there were differences in the way they perceive gender relations and what women should be like and all. So we should take into account all these differences. Okay, right. And any other question, please? Yes. Well, we were expecting to wind up the discussion by 9, but then if anybody else has a question, we had such distinguished people among the audience. So Taputidi, do you have a question? Or Amyoda has left, I think. Anybody else has a question? Yes, somebody wants to speak.
I don't think so. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody. Yeah.
So can
I don't want to have anything to say. I was engrossed in the all the discussions that went on among the young historians with whom I'm not very familiar face to face. I've heard about them, and it was a great privilege to listen to all of you, and I've learned so much from you. I'm nearing 80, and I've learned so many things today, and thank you very much for this very enlivening, very informative discussion. And I don't have any questions. I only have a lot of admiration for all of you, and also for our dear Aparna and Bhashati for organizing this. Thank you, all of you, especially the three.
We're so grateful that you're here with us. I mean, that itself is such an inspiration to have you in the audience, really, for all of us.
Thank you so much.
So grateful.
So much. I'm surely going to get the book soon.
Yeah, there is a Otolanto Ghoshal. He has written, I don't think he can read Bengali. So can I read it out?
Yeah, please do. I think he's just put the song there. Yeah.
Right. এবার আমার উমা
এটা ওই আগমনী সংটা উনি বাংলায় লিখে দিয়েছেন। হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে।
উমায় পাঠাবো না, আমায় বলে বলুক লোকে মন্দ, কারো কথা শুনবো না। যদি আসে মৃত্যুঞ্জয়, উমা নেবার কথা কয়, মায়ে ঝিয়ে করবো ঝগড়া, জামাই বলে মানবো না। দ্বিজ রামপ্রসাদ কয়, এ দুঃখ কি প্রাণে সয়, শিব শ্মশানে মশানে ফেরে, ঘরের ভাবনা ভাবে না। I don't know. The last para, it was as Ramprasad is interpreting this, as she is wondering he's not a family man, so that is the context of. So we should not send to.
So we could have more discussions in the future on the girl child in colonial Bengal or colonial India, the predicament of the girl child who is married so early. I mean, just a few years after her birth, and she doesn't know what childhood means to her. And so we could have more discussions on female friendship networks. I think this has not been addressed in this book, but we could have discussions on this female bondings in pre-colonial. Apologies for not reading the essay yet and asking the question of this later. I think Otolanto Ghoshal has a question. Yes, Bhashati, can you read that out?
Yes, apologies for not reading the essay yet, and asking the question at this late hour. But in many Agomoni songs, I have noticed that while Uma is adored as Ghorer Meye, her husband is often cursed, not as Mahadev, but as a flawed son-in-law, mocked by being poor, addicted, or staying in cremation grounds. Given that Mahadev is usually revered in devotional songs, could this be read as a sectarian contrast, maybe like poetic debates or Kobigan between Shaiva, Shakta, etc.?
Shazi, if you could mute yourself, and I think Meenakshi will answer that. Yeah.
I don't think I've really thought about this, but I think the main issue has been that this, this kind of June McDermott points this out, that, the father, Giriraj, is very, very insensitive to the daughter. So this whole idea of him being alien to domesticity and just as a liminal figure that, he may be all right where he is if he wants to frequent cremation grounds and be a drug addict, but this is not the right hands for my daughter to fall into. So it is this husband, or the fact that Uma is again sort of abandoned. So I saw it as part of this, what I would call a saga of dispossession. And that actually, when we are looking at the history of the female child, you map the kind of dispossession, how they're disaffiliated from lineages of class, caste, other kinds of power, which E.P. Thompson and Tanika Shorkar and all have talked about. So I was basically seeing this whole idea of the wild, the liminal, and how the daughter, who is barely old enough. So this I think sympathy is what I focused on in these particular songs. But as far as the unfeeling, insensitive a man is concerned, I think even the father falls in that category. So it's not just, Uma's husband, who is that all husbands are, because of the nature of things, the husbands are like that. And I basically also felt that, when you look at childhoods, you could also see how when the age of consent debates are on, those very bitter, acrimonious debates, they are trying to actually talk about the, that in a sense, legally, then the boundaries or the conceptualization of childhood is put within that, when you were sort of saying that, 10 to 12, because the fact was that most Hindu men, even the apparently progressive ones, were all right with girls being married off at 8 and 9 and 10 and so on. So to that extent, I'm of course bringing in different things together, but the idea of the girl child as forever bereft, forever, lost in a sense, and betrayed by patriarchies of different kinds, whether it is national patriarchies, whether it is, regional patriarchies, or whether it is the family structure. So basically the alienation of the girl child and then the woman within the structure.
Yeah, but the fathers in Rabindranath Tagore's short stories, the fathers, like say in Kabuliwala or in Dena Pauna, I mean, they are very, very caring and loving, and they take good care of their daughters. Right. So there's a different kind of representation of fatherhood.
In that story, the notebook, in a sense, there's an ambivalence about the way modernities have conceptualized the man. That on the one hand is the new man who is ready to enter into companionate relationships and so on, and understands the woman. On the other hand, you have fathers who are unfeeling and who sort of perpetuate the older structures and systems.
Yes, that's right.
And there is,
so I think,
at the best of times, paternalism. So I'm a little sort of not sure about the fathers, really.
And also these coward men, I mean, like in Bicharok and Conclave and many other short stories and novels, who flirt with widows and then just backtrack. I mean, they just leave. They marry somebody else, like they ditch these women. So there's a whole construction of the coward male coming up in in fiction, and also novels by women like Saint Shoroshibala Boshu's novels. The coward male who doesn't have the courage, ultimately cannot show the courage to marry a widow. So we could also look into that kind of construction of masculinity, this process of constructions of masculinity. I mean, with regard to widow remarriage and all. So the discussion could go on and on, but I think we should stop because it was not a working day for me. I mean, Saturday is my university doesn't have classes on Saturday, though it's not officially closed. But Bhashyatidi had to go to college, and all of you had to go to universities. So all of you must be tired and waiting for your dinner. So we should stop here. And so thank you for a very, very illuminating discussion. I mean, we are immensely enriched. And of course, there are many other issues that I hope you will be able to address, you will try to address in the future. For instance, as I said, female friendships and all, and also the construction of masculinity and fatherhood in colonial period and all. So, I mean, this book could very well have a sequel, and we all would love to contribute to your book. I mean, this should be an ongoing project, and we are already acquainted with Sutapa's works. We teach her works, teach her books. I mean, we refer her works to our scholars, and they cite her profusely. But I personally was not acquainted with Shivangini's works. But then I think since she is working on emotions and affect, well, I need to look her up. I mean, I had to explore her Bangla jake bole to cultivate korte hocche, because my own interest is emotions and affects. I'm working on desires, love, transgressions, and prostitution in the context of colonial Bengal. And Simi, you're such a wonderful person. You've chaired and moderated the session so wonderfully. I mean, it was so nice meeting you all, even though we are all, we are meeting virtually. We are talking on this virtual platform, but I hope we'll be meeting face to face in person someday in the future, because we tend to visit Delhi often, and so you can come to Kolkata, and if you come to Kolkata, please let us know. We can know, because then we can invite you all to our own institutions. So thank you once again. Good night, everybody, and thank you all for joining. Thank you for the informative session, especially based on women. There's a comment by one of our, there was somebody in the audience. Thank you all once again. Bye-bye, Sutapa. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And Simi and Minakidi, we can call you Minakidi. So it was so nice.
In fact, the idea of the showy was very interesting, because I think it houses a lot of ambivalent and illegitimate desire also. I mean, because,
Ganga Jal Patano, right?
Yes, Shoi Patano. Yes, I have an article on Shoi Patano in Bengali, though. Shoi Patano and Shokita. So, okay, bye. We can interact later. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sutapa.
Thank you so much.
Sutapa. Thank you, Shivangini. Thank you, Simi. Right. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.